Welcome to Three Questions With. I'm Hugo, publisher of the Latino News Network and your host. Three Questions With is a public affairs program elevating the voices and visibility of matters most important to the Hispanic-Latino community by speaking with community and industry thought leaders on the social determinants of health and democracy. Multi-generational living is a cultural practice, a way of life, and a manifestation of family bonds. However, all too often, at an increasing rate, many Latinos are living in multi-generational or multi-family situations not by choice, but due to economic need, writes Ana Arzuaga, the housing policy analyst for the Latino Policy Forum. Such economically necessitated living arrangements are referred to as doubling up. Doubled up living is a survival strategy in response to financial distress and depends on mutual support systems within the extended family network. La Casa Norte, a nonprofit that helps unhoused youths and families, follows a housing-first model. The organization offers a continuum of housing resources and services to Chicago's West and South Side communities who experience or are at risk of homelessness. Jose Muñoz is the executive director of La Casa Norte. He is our guest today. Jose, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me, Hugo.
So let's start with the work of La Casa Norte, what it offers, different programs, including permanent, transitional, and emergency housing. Tell us more.
So La Casa Norte is an organization that's been around since 2002. Our primary mission is to serve youth and families who are experiencing homelessness or are unstably housed. We are one of the few providers that actually provide services in the entire continuum of care. We have emergency shelter services. We operate 3 shelters in the city of Chicago, all for youth 18 to 24, 1 in the south side of Chicago in the Back of the Yards neighborhood, 2 in Logan Square. We also offer transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. In our main building, we actually have 25 units of housing within the building that we operate out of, and then operate permanent supportive housing programming throughout the city of Chicago. We're also one of the providers that's helping with the rapid rehousing programming to try to get people quickly out of homelessness and into housing with the goal of getting them into more permanent housing over the long run. In addition to that, we're also doing services throughout the city of Chicago. We have an office in the Brighton Park neighborhood where we do community outreach. We engage youth in those programs. We have 2 drop-in programs specifically for youth where they can come in and get resources for housing, get connected to a caseworker, and to be able to get some support services depending on their needs. And we work with partners to provide food access through our main building in Humboldt Park. So we're doing a number of things. To give you an idea of how large we are, in 2019, we were serving 5,000 people a year. Then the pandemic hit. When we started seeing a big impact in our community, we decided we were going to double down on our mission and make sure that we didn't close our doors and we're going to be there for community. That same year, we grew from serving 5,000 people to over 18,000 citywide. Today, we're providing services to about 20,000 individuals throughout the city of Chicago.
Wow. Now, that statistic you just shared with us, is that a sign of things are getting worse or a sign that things are getting better because people are engaging with organizations like La Casa Norte to get the help that they need?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, so if you remember what was happening during the pandemic, just to give you, just a brief reminder of what happened in there. So I joined the organization February 2020. In March 21st, to be exact, is when everything started shutting down. Places where individuals who were unhoused would go to were no longer available. Things like malls, limited trains, stores were shutting down, restaurants weren't open. At the same time, people started losing their jobs or were underemployed. So now there's more need for those sort of services. 112 food pantries shut down in the city of Chicago at the onset of the pandemic. A lot of shelter programs ended up cutting the number of beds in half in order to meet shelter requirements for social distancing. We decided we're not doing that. We didn't shut our doors down. We expanded, working with our partner, Nourishing Hope, who operates a food pantry in our main building. We expanded the number of hours and the number of days, and when those 112 food pantries happened, we became one of the larger providers in that area. In addition to that, we started hosting pop-up food pantries on the south side of Chicago, creating opportunities for people to have access to food. At the height of the pandemic, we expanded the number of beds by working with the city of Chicago, with the McCormick YMCA, and providing more beds. So there was a need that was in there, and then there was a lot of folks who needed that, but there was also now, put a spotlight on homelessness, and there was more opportunity now to provide those services.
So a lot of lessons learned from the pandemic that even though, for our community, the pandemic is still very much a crisis, although it's not the emergency that it was in the country, at least from the perspective of the government. But there's been a lot of lessons learned, things that adopted, things that began in the pandemic that are still in place now. Okay, wonderful. And in regards, let's talk about the second topic. One of the things that I mentioned earlier in the program was doubling up homelessness. It's this sort of invisible community within homelessness because they're not the people that we're seeing that are living underneath a highway or in tents. Tell us about doubling up.
Yeah, so there are a lot of individuals who are either living with someone or staying with other folks or moving around from place to place who are experiencing homelessness, but because they're not in a traditional, they're not literally homeless, they're not in a shelter, or they're not living on the streets, they don't get counted. And because they don't get counted, they don't have access to the same services and programming like permanent supportive housing or getting counted to be able to get connected with caseworkers. And a lot of people think, okay, well, it's because they're not in a crisis. It's not as unsafe, and that's not true. For a lot of people, that's even an even more unsafe environment. I mean, just to picture having to rely on someone else for your housing, for your food. Not knowing whether that individual can decide that today they just didn't like the way you behaved and you're out on the street. For young people, it's even more dangerous. Young people, they have to rely on other people for housing or to be put for their food or access. A lot of them end up relying on those individuals and make poor decisions in order just to even stay housed. And we're talking about young people that are now put in a situation where they can be abused, where they can be trafficked, where they may have to engage in survival crimes just to be able to continue to stay housed. So it's a very dangerous situation, but they don't get counted. And for Latinos in particular, you look right now, there's about 19,000 individuals that are experiencing homelessness in the city of Chicago that are Latino, and about 91% of them are doubled up. And so, and again, the danger there is that because they're doubled up, because they're not considered literally homeless, they're not counted. It's an invisible population that's just sitting there and in a very dangerous situation.
And they're not getting, because they're not being counted, they don't get some of the same access to the same services that other people who are being counted can draw from. With the community that you work, how is there a large portion of double up homelessness that are working with La Casa Norte to get out of their situation and learn more? How in that population, how many people are you working with?
So we see a lot of families and individuals that are coming into our programs. Sometimes they're not coming into our drop-in and shelter program, but we connect with them through the food access program. They come in for they're coming in for food. They can engage with individuals in there, and we find a little bit about them. But we also have a team that's out particularly on the southwest side, that is doing a lot of outreach. A lot of times it's just getting to know some of those young people or those individuals and finding out where they're at, and then it's educating them on why it's important for them, even if they don't want to come to a shelter, to come into one of our drop-in programs, come in there so they can meet with a caseworker and see we could start. Because now they're visible, because now they've engaged with services, and for others, and this is why it's important to have organizations like La Casa Norte that provide shelter services. There's the stigma with going to a shelter. And I could also say, even in a most safe environment, you're still going into a space where you don't know anybody, where there's a bunch of different beds, and you're coming in with a bunch of strangers, and it's for them it's a scary situation. So we try to invite them in to show them the type of programming and services, and show that it's a safe environment, and we provide those services. We're also taking steps right now to change our shelter model. We're actually in the process of creating what we call non-congregate shelter. And it would be a different type, reimagining what shelter look like for particularly for youth, to create single rooms as opposed to be able to share a room with multiple individuals. Because we believe that not only is it a safe environment, but it's a more inviting environment for the youth that we serve.
Yeah, and like you said, it'll help chip away at some of the stigma around shelters and homelessness. And please count on Illinois Latino News to work with you in providing greater visibility about the programs that you're working, including the one that you said that looking at the individual rooms. I think the more awareness we can give in regards to what a shelter looks like, the services like Casa Norte and others are leading, really important in order to chip away at some of those stereotypes, that stigma. I wanted to talk to you about a forum that's coming up, a referendum that's coming up in March that will be presented to voters that is popular and already in place in other cities. Talk to us about that.
You're talking about Bring Chicago Home.
Yes.
And so the Bring Chicago Home referendum, which voters will have an opportunity to be able to vote on in the upcoming election in Chicago, it's a historic opportunity for the city of Chicago to create a dedicated revenue stream to really end homelessness. You know, the belief is that it could generate as much as $100 million to be able to support homelessness, to support services, and provide more housing programming. What it is this a real estate transfer tax that would be imposed on individuals that are selling property that's over $1 million. If you look at most homes in Chicago, most homeowners, you know, the average home is about $400,000 in the city of Chicago. If an individual decides to sell their home, they're actually going to see a decrease in their real estate transfer tax. So I believe it's not only is it's a great opportunity for the city of Chicago, but it is a historic moment and will create a dedicated revenue stream to really end homelessness in the city of Chicago, and it's to start looking at being able to serve that doubled-up population that we're just talking about.
Now, as I mentioned, this is already in place in other cities like Seattle, San Francisco, but it's still too early to see if this response is going, as you said, hopefully end homelessness. Tell us a little bit about some of the apprehensions that perhaps are in place with the referendum that's coming up in March.
So there's a lot of misinformations out there. There's individuals that are saying, okay, well, with this type of real estate transfer tax, we're going to see a slowdown in the market in terms of buying and selling properties, or less people are going to buy. In those cities that you just mentioned, it hasn't slowed down. One other thing we have seen is that in those cities, when sales have not only have not slowed down, but now they have a revenue stream to be able to support those services. So that's the one thing that we can tell already, is that it's not really going to impact the market.
That's working. Well, we'll certainly be following the referendum and looking at the responses in those other cities to see the effectiveness of those responses, as it not only in those cities, but how it'll affect in the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago. Now, I know you have a personal story to talk to us about in regards to doubling up, and we're happy to learn your story. We are talking to Jose Muñoz, Executive Director of La Casa Norte. When we come back, this native Southsider will talk to us about his personal story with doubling up and how those lived experiences help shape the work that he does with his organization.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Loftus, and I am financially secure. I have made it my business to help you achieve the same financial transformation for 2024. Let me help you understand your personal balance sheet and money fears.
A lot of people don't realize that even if you pull your report yourself, it doesn't affect your score like you think.
In the Money airs on Thursdays at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
We've been talking to Jose Muñoz, Executive Director of La Casa Norte, about the programs the organization offers and doubling up homelessness. Now we're going to learn a little bit more about you. As I mentioned, you're a native Southsider. Tell us about that, and also talk to us about how your experiences with doubling up has helped shape the work that you do with La Casa Norte.
Yeah, well, the work that I do with La Casa Norte was very personal. It's really, I have an opportunity every day to not only make an impact in lives and in the communities that I grew up in, but also to deal with an issue that I personally had experience with. I grew up in Chicago. I'm Mexicano. My mom, I was born and raised in the city of Chicago, but my mom came from Mexico with 8 children, and she came here searching for a better life. When she came, she brought 5 of her kids with her, and then she had me. Most of my life, my mom worked 2 jobs. She's always worked 2 jobs. She went from one to another, always tried to keep food on the table, always tried to keep a roof over our heads, but she wasn't always successful. We bounced around a lot. We moved, we lived with aunts and uncles and friends and family, but we also experienced literal homelessness several times. Either in between moves, there were stretches of time that we were living out of our car. We never ended up in a shelter. We never ended up in any kind of housing program, but we moved around a lot. And so we were part of that invisible family. We're one of those invisible families that was experiencing homelessness but never got counted. And that's how we grew up most of my life. I grew up thinking that was just how life was and it was normal. By the time I was 20, I was on a path where I was either going to end up dead or in jail. That's just the reality of where my life was. But then I had a daughter, and that for me changed my entire life. I made a promise to that little girl the day that she was born that I was going to change her world, that there was no way that she was going to live the way I was living, that I was not going to allow her to be homeless or to bounce around or to live the way that I did. So I started making changes in my life. And I ended up working at a nonprofit organization in my early 20s. I spent about 12 years there working with children and adults with developmental disabilities and trying to keep a roof over our head. But it wasn't easy. And in my early 20s, I was on the same path my mom was. I was working multiple jobs. I was trying to keep a roof over my head and my daughter's head because we weren't in the same home. There was moments where I had to make a decision between keeping her housed and keeping me housed. And I chose to keep her housed, which meant that in those times, I was bouncing around, staying with friends. I was doubled up. There was moments when I was living out of my own car. Times when I slept at work. I would shower and get ready there. It was interesting because people thought at the job that I was in that I was very dedicated because they would see me get there really early and leave really late. And those were the times where I just didn't have anywhere to go. I kept going, kept persevering, and for about 10 years, I was in and out of school. I kept working multiple jobs, odd jobs, and it took me really about 10 years where I finally got to a point where I felt like I was stably housed, where I not only could keep a roof over my head, my family, because I had other kids, but I also graduated college. I graduated from Chicago State University, got my bachelor's in business. I ended up using that degree, opened up a ton of other doors for me and other opportunities. And that's really where my entire life changed for the better. But I always took those stories with me. I always brought that with me, that lived experience that I had since I was a kid. And I always knew that I wanted to stay in the social service sector. So I've worked in public health, I've worked for government, I've worked for several nonprofits. And when I got to La Casa Norte, for me, it was like a dream come true because now I got to do something that was directly related to how I grew up.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that and beginning with your daughter and your children. So proud of the person that you are today and your willingness to leverage those lived experiences to lift yourself up. There are so many people, adults and younger people, that kind of like you, right, are don't see a way out. The situation is normal, but hopefully in listening to you can say, well, wait a minute, here's someone just like me. Si él puede, ¿por qué no yo, right? If he can, why not me? What advice do you have for your younger self or people like, young people like yourself? What are some of the advice that you can give them because they kind of feel they're in that same hole and perhaps don't see a way to get out of it? What advice, you who are an example of rolling up your sleeves and getting it done, what advice would you give them?
I would say the first thing is don't give up. I mean, there's just keep moving forward. things will change. You got to keep working out and don't lose heart. But the second thing, and this is probably even more important, is don't be afraid to ask for help. Because when I went through a lot of things where, looking back, I should have just asked for help. There were people around me that helped me unknowingly, others that intentionally looked out and supported me. I had a boss at the place that I was at that really pushed me to get through college. They, worked with me to motivate me, to expose me to things that I had not been exposed to previously. So it's important there. And I would say an advice for the adults and the folks that are in this space in there, don't, discount somebody just because of the experience or where they're at in that moment. Let's look at homelessness as an experience that I was going through at the time. It didn't define who I was. It was just a situation that I was in. And, homelessness does not define a person. Poverty does not define a person, and so give them a chance. I do that today. With the people that we hire and the folks we're always looking to create opportunity for individuals, because we know that, you go through a rough time and you never know who's going through a rough time in those moments. So be kind to everyone around you. And I always try to say that to folks and other leaders, share your story, talk about the work that you're doing, open up a door for someone else, especially a young person. We have this belief that an individual turns 18 and all of a sudden they're an adult and they can do everything and they can take care of themselves. And that's not the case. For a lot of, young people, I do this with my own kids, and luckily I'm at a point where I was able to do this for them. But at 18, they had an opportunity to really find themselves, to go to college, to go to school, to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives. And they had the support of a parent to be able to do that. But not everybody has that. And at 18, a lot of the young people in our communities are turning 18, and now they have to figure out the whole world with no support. So I as much as possible, it's just we got to continue to be able to provide those support services, not just through our professional work, but even in our day-to-day interactions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And be kind and ask for help. And I think asking for help is so difficult. Sometimes it's cultural, right? We come from backgrounds where you fall down and you got to pick yourself up, and not realize you can ask help to help you pick yourself up. Jose Muñoz, you've been so generous with your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time and for your insights.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Hugo.
When we come back, la última palabra, my final thoughts on doubling up. We've been talking to Jose Muñoz, Executive Director from la Casa Norte.
On the next edition of Change Agents, we will highlight an organization dedicated to creating the next generation of problem solvers, critical thinkers, and future leaders.
We really move with a mission of making smart and chess cool, with chess lessons on the board and life lessons off the board.
Join the conversation Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV 19. Stream us live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV app. Experience the power of community television.
And now, la última palabra, the last word on doubling up homelessness. We often associate homelessness with images of individuals sleeping on the streets, in tents, or under bridges. But there's a less visible form of homelessness that is just as prevalent, if not more so. It's called doubling up homelessness. Doubling up is when individuals or families who are unable to maintain their housing situation move in with friends, family, or even acquaintances. It's often a last resort before resorting to shelters or the streets. In 2022, 32% of Latino households in the nation were multi-generational, reports the Latino Policy Forum. In the Latino community, multi-generational and multi-family living by choice can be mutually beneficial and commonplace. These arrangements make child care and elder care more manageable. They also reflect the proud significance of family ties, the preservation of cultural heritage, and the respect for elders, writes Ana Arzuaga, the housing policy analyst for the Forum. However, many Latinos are living in multi-generational or multi-family situations due to economic need. The reasons for doubling up are many, including job loss, unaffordable housing, domestic violence, or health crisis. While doubling up can provide a temporary solution, it often leads to overcrowded living conditions, stress, and potential conflict. It also doesn't provide the stability necessary for people, especially children, to thrive. Children in double-up situations often struggle academically due to a lack of quiet space for homework and emotional stress of instability. For adults, doubling up can mean a lack of privacy, emotional strain, and difficulty finding or maintaining employment due to instability. Addressing the issue of doubling up requires a comprehensive approach. This includes affordable housing, living wages, and robust social services. We should also call for changes in how homelessness is defined and counted. The current definition fails to capture the full extent of the crisis, leaving many without access to vital services. Illinois Latino News, in partnership with the Latino Policy Forum, is collaborating on a public awareness campaign to rectify historical misrepresentations of the housing challenges the Latino community faces, to be a catalyst for policy change that will benefit Latinos and everyone living in doubled-up housing. Doubling up is a clear sign that our current systems are failing too many people. By bringing this issue to light, we can address the root causes and work towards solutions that ensure everyone has a safe, stable place to call home. And that does it for this edition of Three Questions With, a collaboration by Illinois Latino News and CAN TV. LNN is dedicated to best serving Hispanic Latinos with local multimedia news and information websites across the U.S., including Illinois Latino News, a statewide community-focused initiative. I invite you to look us up on our websites and chat with us via social media. Tell us what you think about the topics we talked about today, and please send me suggestions about what you think we should talk about in the future. Because at the Latino News Network, you are more than just our audience. You are our contributors. I'm Hugo, thank you all for watching.